I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?
From the gates of Mount Rome to the far corners of the Endless Highway, wherever you are, welcome to the show.
So you believe in some kind of Armageddon?
Yeah, most definitely. We in the last times and days right now. The Illuminati's in effect.
Joining me today from the very top of the country, I call it the passageway of the Vikings personally. Her show is called Sasquatch and Sourdough Podcast. Christina, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me from the depths of Maryland. I was really excited. I've been saying that all day. I love your intro, man. It's really good.
Oh, you're from Maryland. I messed that up.
I'm from Maryland. Oh,
okay.
No, it's funny because
I thought you were
the
from
whole
Maine.
day.
So I was like, why is she laughing at me?
Because you made me sound like some sort of like wizard.
Yeah, I know. I wasn't going for that. I really thought you're from Maine, which is like, it is a passageway of the Vikings. That's what that whole state makes me think about. I don't know much about Maryland, so
it's just I don't know.
I'm gonna leave this in though. I messed that up, everyone. Sorry, but welcome to the show.
Well, I don't know. So you're like much better at like geography. I barely even know that I live in Maryland. So like I know that there's probably some sort of like shift that happened. So yeah, it's like a trickle down. I need to look up where Maryland.
It's the East Coast, right? Do you guys have coastline?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like Chesapeake Bay. Yeah.
Oh, well then it's still the passageway of the Vikings. That works.
There we go. Okay.
That works.
Yes.
There were civilizations that they had established in around 1000 AD up in Canada, up in Newfoundland, and they were just trickling down from there.
Okay, yeah.
And so so that whole upper east coast, the northern East Coast is where they were coming through. Way before Columbus. So I think it's significant in that way.
I knew it when I came on here I was going to learn a whole bunch of stuff.
Oh, we don't have to talk about Vikings. But I was going to ask you though. So before I messed up your state, before I hit record, you mentioned a book to me. What's the name of that book again?
I have it right here. It's called Sears Sea. It's by Douglas Overmeyer. So I was just on the Unrefined podcast with Brandon Spain, and he suggested this to me because I think he had him on, but the book it's like instructions on seeing into the spiritual realm. And I guess the entire like point of it is that this ministry is for people that like, you know, if you're trying to pastor people that have seen like really weird stuff or that, you know, they see ghosts or the paranormal or whatever, like how do you minister to them? And the author, his daughter, apparently like has been seeing ghosts like her whole life and spirits her whole life. So I'm not super far into it, but I got to a point the other day where her experience really reminded me of like my own childhood experience. Like she was seeing ghosts and they were realizing it. And I had like an imaginary friend that was just really, I don't know. The more that I kind of dig into everything, it's just like, I don't know, something feels weird about the imaginary friend.
Yeah. I think that a lot of kids that have the imaginary friend in a very potent kind of a way where it's almost like people are who walk down the hall and see the child talking like to something as if it's there but it's invisible. I think those kids are more primed to go on and have
Yeah.
an actual paranormal experience, whether or not that's paranormal or not, and it might be. But that's a tough place to be in, I think, for a pastor. I mean, because in my mm, I don't talk about this a whole lot, but I had a very similar situation where I had a paranormal experience happen to me, and the religious people in my life, the pastors in my life, didn't have anything to say about it,
Yeah.
and that was really bad for me at the time. And clearly, a lot of my research is predicated on there being a spiritual realm,
Sure.
and it's not because I want to believe. I hear that phrase a lot these days. For me, it was
Hmm.
I didn't have any choice. I lived in a haunted house when I was in middle school. That's when all this happened.
Yeah.
And I saw something walk right out of my room one night.
Yeah.
So,
It's it's crazy. Um, because I hear that a lot. So I didn't grow up in church, and but I had a lot of, just experiences throughout my life, including like from childhood. And so the more people that I talk to on the show and the more, just kind of getting involved in this community, you hear that so much more. And I think this is such a great space because people are feeling welcome to tell their stories and to share more. And I
mhm.
think I just talked about this the other day, like, back in the day, people weren't sharing these phenomenon. They weren't sharing what they were seeing. And so now we're kind of in this, age of disclosure.
Yeah,
And people are really just, this is a very, very special time that God's put us all into.
yeah, yeah, and even in my experience before the new millennium, back in the '90s, late '90s, and all that, this was still a very, very much a taboo. But
Mm-hmm.
even back then, because I've done my homework now, because I've had these experiences, and I try not to bombard people with these experiences on my show. I do want people to believe me when I have something to say, so I don't lay out every little weird thing that's happened to me. But
Yeah.
regardless of my experience, there are thousands, if not millions, of accounts between
Mm-hmm.
humans and non-humans, us and something else, us and the unseen realm, if I could quote Heiser, use his terminology there. It's an undeniable element to this place, to this earth, whatever this is, right? Whatever
Oh,
this
yeah.
dimension is. And there's a very folky interpretation of the Book of Enoch that I find interesting that kind of lays out that there was this cosmic war between like lower celestial entities who felt and like maybe that divine council or some sort of a higher panel of entities, but the smaller ones fell to earth and became fixtures of certain regions and certain elements. So you have desert spirits like the jinn. You have
Yeah.
water spirits like sylphs. You see them in the old alchemical texts. Nephilim spirits, they wander the earth. They're kind of like
Yeah.
ghosts, I guess. But I don't know. And I think the Nephilim part would explain a lot of the poltergeisty stuff. I think that looking back, and I'm not 100% sure, I think that what I experienced in my room that night may have been one of these disembodied spirits of something older, like an older ancient intelligence.
Was it something that was it kind of like one of those shadow
It was
figures
totally a
type?
shadow.
Yeah.
Hmm. It
Was
was a
it
weird,
something?
weird black shadow. I was very scared. It had jumped on me, and
Wow.
if I don't know if I was asleep before, but I felt something, so I woke up and I sat up in bed. And I don't know if they say they feed off of our fear. So maybe it got like charged up by my
Mm.
fear enough for me to see it or something. I don't know.
So where so you saw it with like your natural eye,
Yeah.
like you
Hmm.
saw the shadow.
Hmm. Yeah. I sat up
Hmm.
in bed and opened my eyes, and like things had been happening. So I was at this point, I was like 13 probably. I was sleeping with my bedroom door open and the hall light on. That's how
Oh,
freaked
wow.
out I was. And
Yeah.
like there was a lot of stuff happening to me at this point in life. Like I was in the middle of a spiritual battle. I hadn't accepted Christ yet, but I was about to. So I don't know if there was like a war for my soul happening in real time or what, but yeah,
Yeah.
I
I
sat
mean,
up
that's
in bed
probably,
and I looked and this thing walked out of my room and I could, even though it turned and looked at me,
that's crazy.
is like I've never told that story on here. I've been avoiding it like the plague because
Yeah.
I don't, it was so traumatizing for me that I don't even want to bring that energy back into my life. So I haven't even told it, but that's what
Yeah.
happened. But even though it was a shadow, it was like a really dense, dark shadow. But I could tell that it turned and looked at me and then it just like disappeared.
Ugh.
But with the Enoch thing, like I think that's just an interpretation of Enoch. I find it compelling. But my point is like I think uh, if you want answers for this stuff,
Yeah.
the answers will find you if you want them bad
Yeah.
enough.
Well, and it's interesting because the more people that I talk to and the more, I just the whole premise I think really for what I'm doing on Sasquatch and Sourdough is just to have like I think of it as a table. And I meant to I always forget how to pronounce this word and what the word is, but the Hebrew word for table it actually means like two different things at once. It means like a plank where you would set like food at and come together, but it also means a place to reconcile differences. So I actually heard a really good sermon about that. And the pastor, it was called The Technology of the Table. And it was just all about setting and creating space. So that's what I really want to do is just have an atmosphere and a space for people to come in and share their encounters. But then also, like, number one, not really if you don't want to sit and try to dig into exactly what it is, I don't really think that that matters as much as, well, are you walking with the Lord? And if you are, then what did you learn from it? And what does he want you to do with it? If he wants you to do anything with it, you
Yeah.
know?
And speaking of Heiser, I think that's what he did. I think he went
Yeah.
into these more shadowy, esoteric trenches where you aren't supposed to go, or maybe more traditional Christianity has told you you aren't supposed to go. And with Heiser, it's like he came out on the other side with deeply impactful things to
Mm-hmm.
say, and these were things that the church had missed. And I think we need more of that.
Yeah. I think so too. And I think we need more kind of just places where people can have these conversations, you
Hmm.
know. That's just kind of what I want to do is, and also provide like resources for people. Like I was saying that the gal that I was talking to earlier, she's a paranormal investigator. She's not a follower of Jesus. She's doing her own thing. She's like spiritual. Totally get that. That's where I was for a very, very long time. She's lucky because she doesn't seem to be like, at least from what I saw, like not super affected, you know, but that
Hmm.
doesn't mean that it's not going to have repercussions in your life or somebody's life in your house or,
Yeah.
whatever. So I
Yeah,
try not to
absolutely.
like, but I was able to share that book with her and I was able to share, some of my testimony. So I think it's just kind of about like leveling the playing field a little bit because the people, so my whole kind of, I guess, what really started all of this off for me is, you know, when I came to faith, thinking about, all right, well, revelation, whenever all that starts unfolding, I think we're probably seeing a little bit of it now, like it's getting really weird. You're going to have a lot of people that are experiencing a lot more weird things as the veil starts thinning. So who's going to
It
minister to
is.
them? Yeah. Like, so
That
who?
is something is happening.
Oh,
Something
for
is start,
sure.
and like even if the veil just has always been somewhat thin, something has happened in recent times where it's thinner than it's ever been. I think people have always had these encounters, and like
Yes.
people argue about the UFO thing, but like I've really looked into it, and there was some sort of a shift where people were seeing, they've always been seeing fairies and
Mm-hmm.
things like that, these maybe like earth elementals. And then somewhere in at the turn of the century, after the year 1900, you start to see these UFO, these alien type entities emerge and take the place of the fairies.
Yeah. Or so, and a lot of the things like the research that, I've done and the stories that I've kind of come across is it's almost like you were saying, there's different elementals, there's
Hmm.
air, there's, so it's just like, are people just not, I don't like saying this, like looking up more, but is it just like that's
Well,
more of
there's
attention? We're not in the woods as much anymore, you
yeah,
know?
there's that, but there is some sort of like Art Bell used to call it the quickening.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think he realized even in the 80s that the veil was thinning,
Yeah.
or something akin to the veil thinning was happening.
Right. It's it's just it's just so fascinating. But that's like
There's
kind of my
always
whole
been
point.
sightings, but like my whole thing is,
Hmm.
and you've probably heard me talk about this. I mean, because I've talked about it a lot lately. Like I know you know Bo Kennedy, and I was talking to him about it. So it's like that whole 1947 thing when Roswell happened. Something switched then.
Something totally did. And you know what really reminded me of that is because everyone's sort of talking about that, like it's
Mhm.
really coming up in conversation. But I read something the other day that again, it was like another little pinpoint on that year. Um, that was the year I think that, they really started getting into like processing food, processed food, canned food, things like that. Like there was something about the food and just, we didn't have to farm. Everything was getting easier, all of those kind of, I guess, agricultural departments. Like, don't quote me,
No, yeah,
but
yeah.
it's just another layer of every time
47
every
built
time we
up
turn
to
around, 1947 keeps being problematic.
yeah, yeah. It was like I've said it before, it's a threshold year because
Mm,
right after whatever happened with World War II, whatever that was, uh, something broke and was the door just like it's like the frame for the door broke and the door just swung open nice and slow in 1947.
yeah.
It's like, if this is a house that war rattled everything loose and the door just and so we stepped through some sort of like a supernatural spectrum, if you will, in 1947. And I think that like with the food stuff,
Mm,
a lot of stuff happened like that in 47 that led us up to years like 1954, where you get the Eisenhower administration and where he was behind the scenes, he was working with the Dulles brothers and the CIA and the
mm-hmm.
propagandist Edward Bernays. And that's when you really started seeing this food thing change. Like they started marketing certain foods to people and people just started changing their diets because of this government op.
Yeah.
But it goes back, but the ignition was 1947 in that area somewhere. That's interesting. I'll have to look into that food thing more.
I can't remember where I read that or heard it, but it just kind of I was like, oh man, that's another one. And I don't really feel led to dig around in conspiracies much. I
Mhm.
listen like I listen to I love your work with Heidi Love. I think that what you guys do is like fascinating.
No,
Like that deep
thanks.
dives. Yeah, it's really and
It
she's
always leads back to the occult, though.
I know. And so I gotta I have to be really careful just because then I just get like not that I can't, look at that stuff or investigate into it or whatever and do research into it. It's just kind of like I guess my whole thing where I am is just like, okay, well, why?
The why
Like,
is important.
and
We
I've
talked
asked,
about this
yeah,
in a message, and I thought I think that's extremely important because
yeah,
I mean, I don't know about you, but like what drew me to podcasting, what I saw in this was like a reigniting of the commerce of ideas.
yeah,
So it became a new artistic forum to parse through big ideas for me. And when I say big ideas, like spiritual or conspiracy or whatever, I like the stuff that's so powerful that whatever it is, that it's been rooted out of the everyday person's knowledge base by the elites so that they could have more power over us. And I'm
right,
talking about the type of knowledge that's been systematically uprooted because that's how it works. They strip out our spiritually liberating ideas, and they replace them with these bad ideas, and they enslave us in a system that drains us of our time and our intellect.
Well, it's all connected. I mean, if you think
Hmm.
about it, if you think about, I mean, obviously we're in a very, very not so Christian society right now. Like we're so far, but I think that we're being called back. And I think that really what I'm seeing through all of these stories that people are, kind of telling is that God is using whatever is happening, whatever is unfolding
Yeah,
to
he
bring us
is.
back,
That's the thing. We're
Yeah.
enslaved until we aren't. The right
Yeah.
information will break us out.
Yeah. I had a note that I wrote, like, I was listening to some of your stuff and I had so many notes, but one of the things that just really keeps coming back to me is just that we're so far, we're in this beautiful landscape that God created, like Earth, but we're so far from his plan for the garden. And you can see it and I guess that's probably why it's important to look at how things have changed over time. And I think that's why I appreciate your show so much, because you lay that out really nicely. Because I don't have the like attention span to like go through some of that stuff, But the
Well,
cool thing is you
I
can
think
see it on.
everybody's working with a lot of other podcasters, yourself included, are working with powerful information. You
Yeah.
know, I
Yeah.
just go where I'm led to go, and
Sure.
it's not even. I didn't start this as a ministry either. I don't know. I'm not using that term yet.
No, I don't use that term either
Yeah,
at all.
I just
I
go
don't
where it
even,
takes me.
yeah, I don't even know what that, I mean, when I say that I minister to people, that's to me, that's just sitting across from you and listening
Sure.
to your story and,
Yeah,
you
good
know,
point.
loving you where you are, whether you're
Hmm.
walking with the Lord or not. Because I mean, that's kind of getting back to my point is, you know, when all this, as we keep unfolding and whatever is going to keep happening, we keep getting closer, to whatever people, more and more people are going to be experiencing more and more things that they just do not have answers for. And the church is who should have the answers. We should
Yeah.
be as followers, not the capital C church, but as us little kind of folk people with our, you know, just our, I guess our just love for the Lord and doing what we're doing here in these spaces. That I really just, when I came into this and really gave it over to him, it really became clear that there needs to be more people just kind of setting the table for folks to come in and just and talk about it, because that's a
Hmm.
big thing. People have a lot of, I hate using the word trauma, but it really is. I mean, you just told a story that you have been uncomfortable in your spirit to tell because you don't know what's going to happen if you even talk about it. And there's plenty of Native Americans that don't even want to say the word skinwalker because of the ramifications of it.
Yeah,
So there's a lot of,
that's what it is. It's in that sense. It's in that
yeah,
spirit that I don't want to
because
tell stories like that. Just
you don't
because I
want to
don't want to
call it
have to.
back.
I already have to pray over my house once a week because of the stuff I am talking about. I try not to bring other stuff in, more negative
Sure.
stuff in. I'm already dealing with it, but I think the church, back to your point, I think the church has dropped the ball
I hear that a lot, but I want to
in
say
general.
that there's a lot of hope, because there are, you can see the bigger sort of platforms in this weird fringe space are getting the attention of mainstream Christianity. And so that's going to make people, I think, go to their pastors. And I've had a lot of conversations with people about, I really want to start this in my church. And I'm like, go to your pastor.
Yeah,
I'm very, very lucky because the church that I go to is, when I had this idea of a project, I took it to my pastor and he was just like, he's from West Virginia. So he's like, of course you want to start a Bigfoot podcast, you weirdo. Like, I mean, he just loves it. And he
yeah.
thinks, I mean, he's, you know, I have his blessing because he knows that the model of ministry that we do at that church is, it's as I don't want to say perfect, but it's a fantastic model of ministry, because what it does is it equips people to go out and to walk in their purpose with the Lord. And that's what they were supposed to be
We
doing.
need more of that though. And like
Yeah.
you're one of the lucky ones. I know, and
I totally am. I
I
totally am.
acknowledge that these kind of churches exist. I know they're out there,
Yes.
but the problem is they're so few and far between. Because I mean, think of, like when I look at a lot of my big revelatory moments for studying weird stuff lately has been a rediscovery of Ephesians 6, where it says we
Mhm.
wrestle with principalities, not against flesh and blood. I don't think that the modern church and the modern church people consider what that unseen realm of principalities actually is.
Yeah.
And I think that like the more esoteric stuff, the more supernatural stuff sheds light on that in a very know your enemy type of way. I hope that there's more. I hope that there's a reformation happening within the pastors of America right now that will help us break through to an enlightenment.
I think you're going to see that. And I think the reason is because, like I said, you're going to see more people who are either churched people that are not getting answers from pastors, which is not, as I said, not at all the case in my, that's not what I experienced, but I know so many people that experience that. So you're not getting the answers, or your questions are being like poo-pooed, or everything is a demon, or everybody needs deliverance, which is,
Yeah.
that's starting to drive me crazy. Like there's all this stuff that just keeps trending. And I just don't think that it's all so black and white. And what's going to
It's not.
happen is you definitely are going to see this reformation. I think that's a great word, because people are just going to be like, okay, well, the answers aren't here, but they're also not in science. And we need to get back to that sort of, like I said, that folk before superstition. I don't know if I keep getting this every time I go back into looking into like just really our early history of not so much Christianity, but like a lot of, folklore and stuff like that. Like I
Hmm.
keep going back into folklore because
Yeah.
there was a time when we believed in these spirits and these things.
Well, they
And there
were
was a
one. The
they
folklore
right.
and the alchemy was
Yes.
one because
Yeah.
you worked with the elemental spirits. The alchemists did. Some of them did.
Right.
Even the Christians, because there was a
They're
huge,
Christian alchemists. Yeah.
yeah, and that's what nobody wants to talk about. And
Right.
I think we're talking about like this esoteric world. And the church
Mhm.
is has been deeply afraid of a lot of this because it's over their head in a deeply esoteric sense. Because this knowledge that we're talking about was stripped out of society and the churches.
Well, and I think what happened is church became a business, you know.
Yeah. And,
It
and,
just
and a
that's
lot
just
of,
what it is.
yes, there's that, the money corrupts and all that. But
Mm-hmm.
a lot of what I find is like in this pool of lost knowledge is even though it's hidden, if you can find your way back to it and keep your bearings, it doesn't contradict with Christianity.
Right.
Doctrine wise, it complements a lot of the like. I'm glad you know about this because, the esoterics of old were Christians, and they don't
Mm-hmm.
tell you that. No one tells you that. There were a lot of these guys, Saint Cyprian.
Mm-hmm.
There was Johannes Kelpus. There was Paracelsus. There was Pasquale. They were in their day and age. They were threats to the secular world and the church.
Yeah.
In fact, like Kelpius moved to Pennsylvania in the late 1960s. No, 1690s. Let me
Yeah.
get that right.
That's
Just
good.
to get out of Europe. But that was a
Yeah.
weird time for Europeans to be moving over. That's very early.
So that kind of gets me back into one thing that and again, I haven't, this is just like a theory that I've been kind of, I don't know, the more I look into folklore is just something happened with superstition.
Mm.
And I'm questioning, like, it's just like one of those questions, right? Like, what happened in that time period where it almost became like this, I guess you would call it like, just a marketing scheme almost, to just like, oh, well, that's just superstition. Because when you go back into old, now I don't have any of this prepared to talk about, but it's just kind of like from my own research is like you go back into old newspaper articles and everything that is happening that's like, some weird hermit lady, over there, like, oh, once we burned down her hut, and now like you follow that story, like they talk about it again like 50 or 100 years later, and they'll bring it up and they'll be like, oh well, you can see how superstitious they were back in the 1600s, and it's like, dude, you're in the 1700s. It's
Yeah, but
very interesting how that
that's
kind of,
part of what I'm talking about. That's part of what
yeah.
happened was like Pennsylvania. The reason why some of these guys came over in 1690 was
Mm-hmm.
because Pennsylvania had some of the loosest religious rules anywhere on the planet. So they were being persecuted for these esoteric beliefs over in Europe because of the
Yeah.
church. And again, the secular state as well was persecuting them. They kind of teamed up because this knowledge was like threatening to both of them.
Yeah.
So and then it crossed the pond and it came over here. So a lot of these guys came over here to get away from it, and then it caught up with them.
Right. Right.
It's crazy. And
It's really interesting to me how you can just sort of watch it when you go back into that historical record,
mhm.
and you can see like how they're just kind of like, oh yeah, they were so superstitious back then. Look what they believed in. And it's just like, okay, but then you also find accounts of other weird stuff happening too. So it's interesting
Well,
how it
these
just kind
guys,
of gets brushed under the rug, it disappears.
it was brushed under the rug and it was forgotten. And it's crazy because it's in the origins of science. Like even Isaac Newton, he was an alchemist.
Yeah.
All the first scientists, the last alchemists were the first scientists. All those guys believed in some sort of spellcraft
Mm-hmm.
dealing with elemental entities. So they believed 100% in folklore. And like
Yeah.
there's like the Pennsylvania Dutch and people in Appalachia where I'm from, there are
Yeah.
pockets of people who still believe this stuff. It
Well, yeah,
used to
you
be a
guys have all the
technology.
what is it? Well, because like Timothy Renner does great work with all. I have like
Hmm.
all of his books. He covered one case in Hex. It's called Hex Hollow. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's in Pennsylvania, and
No,
it
tell me
was
about it.
it was a murder of a guy. I think his name was Rhyme. I'm gonna mess it all up, but he basically was one of those like folk, practicing folk magic. What's
Hmm.
it called? Powwow.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
all the powwow stuff.
Yep.
Timothy Renner has written like several books. Actually, Crystal and I early on were
Have you heard
going.
the episode I did with him?
I don't think I've actually listened to that one. I don't know
Okay, yeah.
why.
We actually
Yeah.
talk about this book. It's called Powwow on
Yes,
that
the long
episode.
lost friend. And
Hmm.
I
You
I
know
have
about
listened.
this?
Yes, because Crystal and I went to that house because we were going to do
What?
our first episode. So listen to this. Our first episode was Hex Hollow. And we went because that was our whole thing. We were like, let's just go do fun day trips and like talk about cool stuff and like do the research and go to the historical. Like, we love that stuff. So we're just going to keep it nice and light and fresh and just like, two gals on the town looking at cool stuff.
When you
So
say
we
you're
went to,
going to the house, you're going to John Holman's house, the guy who wrote this. Is that what you mean?
no,
Okay.
this case it's called, it's like called Hex Hollow is like where it happened in
Oh,
Pennsylvania.
okay. I'm sorry. I'll
It's
let you
like,
finish.
no, it's right over the line, like it's like York County.
Okay.
Um, and so basically the entire like point of the story is that this guy Reimeyer, he was a practicing, he was a powwower. He was a really, really tall, big guy. And apparently there was he got tied up with these other people and he was murdered, and the whole idea was that the one guy said that he had like put a spell on him, his crops were failing, all that
Hmm.
sort of stuff, and he needed to get his long lost friend book, and it was in the basement of his house. And so what he found like two other people, got them involved, and I'm like, this is totally not facts. This is just me telling the story. But like, I mean, it's not like, I'm
Yeah,
telling it
yeah.
off or something.
You're good.
But they like went, got him like drunk, stayed at his house all night, and it's crazy because what happened was they tried to like they killed I think they killed him, like they beat him because they tried to get in the basement. They knew that the book was in the basement, and for some reason, he was putting spells on them, and they couldn't really get him subdued. And then they like basically set him on, like they knocked him out and set him on fire. He burned, but the house never burned. Now, this is a very loose retelling. You guys can look it up and definitely check into, because Timothy Renner is basically like a pro at all this. Like he's so great at this. And he knows all about that. And I've actually like reached out to him about it before, but
I think he lives in York County too.
he does. And that's what I'm saying. He's like, just go to the source. He's a fantastic researcher. But the funny thing was like so Crystal and I just wanted to tell that story because we were just like, oh, this is really cool. Let's go to the house. And we drove by and we took a day and it was really fun. But when we got to the house, it was just like, we felt so bad because we're just like, okay, it's like the middle of the day. We're just like creepily looking by, like trying to get B-roll content. And like, I was like, I don't know. I feel like this is just not our story to tell because when we looked into it and we sat down and we told the story, like, we had all of our notes and we like got it all out. And as we were telling the story, we were just like, this guy that did this is flippin' evil. Like he's terrible. This is really, really terrible. This guy, like, no matter what you think about long lost friend, because I've read it. That's what got me like interested. I was like, dude, what is even in here?
Well,
And it's just
let me ask you this real quick. It was the guy, so the guy wanted his copy of this book so bad. Was he trying to break the hex on him?
yes, it was to break the hex that he thought was like put on him or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And as we were looking into it, it was just like this guy was terrible. Like he preyed on like, a young child and some guy in the neighborhood that was not so smart. It was just like this really bad story. And we were like, you know what? We actually recorded an entire episode and we never published it because we both felt like in our spirits gross about telling this guy's story.
Really? I get that.
Yeah.
I don't know what, there it is. Yeah. This book I got this for research purposes. I'm not like trying to.
I downloaded it too. And I looked through and I was just like, well, what are they even talking about in here?
It tells you how to break hexes and curses. And, this is for a different kind of person. Modern people have to kind of step out of the world they think they know to understand this because these people used to live out in the elements. They didn't have heat, they didn't have AC. Some of these people didn't have refrigerators.
Mm-hmm.
They were living a different kind of a lifestyle where they are constantly in a battle with the elements. And they've got chickens and cows and they've got panthers and things that want to eat those cows, and then they've got little scuffles happening with the farmer over the hill and stuff like that. They needed if any kind of a supernatural helping hand they could get, I think they needed it, honestly.
And you know what? Hearing you talk about that is exactly why I really can say this, I think, completely with accuracy, is that I think it was just the Lord saying, you're not going to tell the story, right? Like,
okay.
It's already been told, but also at that time, I had a really bad religious spirit about myself because when you come out of like a lot of, new age and occult sort of stuff and especially unbelief, and then you come into faith, it gets really weird and you kind of pick up that religious spirit because at least for me, I really didn't want to go back into that stuff. I was sort of afraid of it. And I thought that it was all wrong. Again, the black and white, like everything bad, Jesus good. Yes. And it just really kind of shook me up for a long time. And I think that because when I had first like read that book, it was just like, oh man, look at these, superstitious, like I was not looking at them like you're supposed to as, okay, let's put myself in this, what time period, who is this book written for, and what's their belief system, being able to look at them as, actually like fellow brothers and sisters, probably in Christ. I mean, I'm not going to say that they weren't,
I think like, they were. I do.
I think that when I look back on it now, it's like exactly what you said. They were really trying to do what they knew with what they had.
Yeah, because the book instructs them to do this stuff in the name of Jesus as a Christian. So it's and I'm with you. Like I've been real quiet about my stance on this book on here because of because of this conversation we're having right now. But personally, I don't think it's black and white. I think that it's a big gray area. Personally, what I think is that everything I just said is correct about it used to be people battling the elements with the people who
Yeah.
just had savage lives. They had the cold in winter and they had the panthers in summer and they just couldn't catch a break. And they also lived in an age where there were wizards and black magicians everywhere. And I
Right.
think that God possibly gave some of his people a helping hand and said, okay, I'm going to give them a spiritual technology to use here in my name. I think that tradition has been totally lost, totally forgotten, and totally shunned by the modern church. But I think something like that was happening. And it's hard to talk about today because it's so taboo.
It is. And I think also because what I try to also remind myself of is that it's very interesting because we kind of are doing that again now. Some people are. I mean, I can't
Mhm.
speak for myself, but you had people that could not read. So they had a Bible that someone read to them and interpreted for them. And it was usually either a preacher or a pastor. So depending upon whatever his motives might be, you know, so you kind of get into that realm of, could it have been something more of political pastors, wanting to control a community and saying, well, this is my way, this is the right way. But we know that everybody's individual walk with the Lord is a very personal thing.
Mhm.
It should be a personal relationship. It should not be,
Yeah.
it's a relational walk. And he's going to reveal things to you that he wants you to know for your purpose that he has for you for his kingdom here.
Hmm.
Um, so I didn't know. I mean, I think I was just too immature in my faith to really dive into that and to even, I mean, I've never even publicly said that we even did an episode. And it's funny because when we
It's
did the
black. This is
episode,
black belt stuff. This conversation we're having right now is
yeah,
very black belt stuff for two believers. This is
yeah.
advanced stuff.
And that's the funny thing too, because I find myself in this space and I don't have a lot of, big theological, you know, I guess, I'm not a theologian. I didn't go to Bible college. I'm kind of just sussing this stuff out too, but I know enough to know like when something just does not feel right that I can kind
Yeah.
of take a look at. And I kind of am a little bit good at just looking at kind of communities as a whole and seeing like what works, what doesn't, and kind of like sussing out like, well, what are they kind of going through? But I don't think that I was mature enough to go back or to look at them and be like um
Yeah. Well,
non-judgmental, really,
yeah,
you
and we're
know?
not doing it, I used to think that I was doing something wrong by having a conversation like this, and
Oh yeah.
I think that's just years of programming from this current church situation that we find ourselves in. But honestly, I think there is you said something about theological, and I mean, I could see that kind of like flowing into the stream a little bit where it's like, because Jesus was he walked a very similar line, I think, to some of these outlaws of doctrine that we've been talking about, like the old alchemists and
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And
Yeah.
and I think it's even symbolic in the crucifixion itself, because Jesus was crucified on a hill called Golgotha,
Mm-hmm.
which means skull. And he
Yeah.
was placed right in the middle of the skull, in the
Yep.
middle of the hill, right? But metaphorically, that's right between the two hemispheres of the human brain, right? And he's right
It's
dead in the
crazy.
center of two paths or two opposites,
Mm-hmm.
if you will. He walks, he's like the Johnny Cash song. He literally walks the
Walks
line
the line.
between secular and religion. I think that's why he went up against the church and flipped the table and all that.
Yeah.
And I think this is all the Golgotha esoteric story there. I think it's calcified in the words, "No man cometh to the Father but by me."
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
nobody talks about how Golgotha was locally said to be the grave of Adam, the place of Adam's
Yes.
skull. So you think about how powerful that is, because it's like Christ is crucified on the grave of the first man,
Yep.
aka he's dying to conquer death for mankind. It's brilliant. Why don't
It
we hear
is.
that in church?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think I keep hitting this thing and it's going to make noises, but I think I can kind of speak to that because being kind of on the other side of it and like obviously like coming from unbelief, it's one thing when you look in and you look at all Christians, right? And it's like I just lumped them all into together. And what I was looking at was evangelical Christians, you know what I mean? Like that evangelical church. Um and nothing and because I had a Catholic upbringing, so I wanted something different from that too. So it's like when you look at like, oh, okay, well, they can't even get it together either, like the evangelicals. Um, but it's interesting because now that I'm on the other side of it and I work, you know, in production ministry, I understand why we structure church the way that we do, because it's not meant to just, you know, hold your hand throughout the entire week. It's meant to be there for people to at least come in the door and make that like step of faith, because people aren't doing it in their homes. You know, a lot of the people, at least the community that we serve, we have a lot of, you know, ex-Catholic community. So people that are just like, they don't even go to church once a week. It might be twice a month, you know. So it's in order to kind of lessen the anxiety,
or it's on Easter or Christmas.
Right.
Twice a
Creasters,
year.
exactly. Like, you know, but it's the entire point of coming together and having that communion of the saints on Sunday and worshiping together is the start of your week. I just had this conversation with my sister. It's the start of your week. So we want to make it as less stressful as possible so that you know what to expect when you get there. But then also, our pipeline is we want you to do this the entire week. We want you to be in a group of believers that you are able to pray with and just fellowship with throughout the week. Does everybody do that? No. And that's fine, but it gets harder and harder when you try to walk that line, if you try to do it by yourself, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I can see the importance of church, and I see a lot of people, especially in this community, you know, that I don't even know. I always just call it like the fringe. It's almost like this alternative Christian community that's like developing, and I really enjoy it. But what I see is a lot of people are just not going to church, or they're starting home churchings.
This community is picking up the slack.
It is
for the pastors who aren't doing this job already, I think.
Yeah. And one of the first things I ask people is, do you have a church? Do you have a home church? Do you go to church wherever you live? Most people say no. Most people say, well, I have like a small group, or, you know, and then it's like, well, what do you do when you have question, or when you need someone to pray with you, or, you know, whatever you do. And they're reaching out to the people on Instagram. They're reaching out to the, you know, this little community of podcasters. It's amazing.
Well, okay. So, and I hear you. And I know there's a community factor to church, and you know, it helps with the personal spiritual development and growth for people. I get all that. I'm disappointed in what I see out there for the most part.
Sure.
So that's why I come at it the way I do. And because I think the esoteric has become a bad word to most Christians, and I don't see it that way. But anyway, my question for you is this: how did you get to this level of understanding, especially when it comes to like, because you seem to have an understanding of the occult. How did you come to that? I'm very curious about that.
All right, I just realized I was probably like, understanding what, me? Like,
you get what you understand, what, you know, you can hang, it seems like, with the occult conversation.
Well, like I said, because I mean, I've experienced it. Like so my whole journey here, I mean, you have to think about it this way. I first told my story on the Bump podcast in March last year. And that's where so now I'm 20 episodes of my own podcast in, and already like God is moving this thing to whatever he's doing here. I don't even know, but I'm just along for the ride. But I mean, I had, like I said, experiences my entire childhood, you know, lifetime. I had the story that I think I told first on Bo's show it was just really weird. We had a lot of like turmoil in my family, but what we did, like what happened was I had the imaginary friend, which I'm kind of just now like putting that puzzle piece together. But I would have this experience of like, when I would try to go to bed, just this like, almost like a blanket or covering of lights would kind of come, but it was like even when I closed my eyes, I could still see them. So when I was telling that story on the Unrefined podcast, that story is what prompted them to tell me to go read this book, See or See, because he talks about that phenomenon and that experience. I had never heard anybody else have that experience.
What happened?
So
What happened though?
it just it would just be really weird. I would be going to like bed and my whole body would just go numb, and I would see these floating like just dots of like lights, like different, like kind of like the lights you see behind me, like blue and purples, and it was always like blue, purple, and kind of green, and they would just kind of come down just like this, whatever this guy is, those little zappy things. It was just like this light that
Were
would
your eyes closed?
so it would happen when they weren't closed and
Oh,
then when they
wow.
were closed.
Both.
And yes, and
Oh.
that's what was really freaky. Now, I've always told this because I've always been kind of like into, weird stuff my whole life. I grew up with the X-Files. I grew up with like all the weird stuff, going to the library, looking up folklore. It's
Yeah.
always been in me. So when I would grow up and tell my story to like my weirdo, new age friends, no one had a context. And it was just kind of like, oh, wow, that's weird, and just put it away. Like I never tried to figure out what it was. It was just a weird experience. Um, and then when I would learn about like transcendental meditation, and it's like, well, I wasn't meditating because I was like 7, 8, 9, 10. I was young.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of trauma in the house. So it was just this weird thing. And then I had experiences where I would try to go to bed. Now, again, I don't know exactly the timeline because I was young, but I would go to bed and I would close my eyes, and I had a TV in my room, and it was like further, across from me, my bed. And I would close my eyes when I would open my eyes, and my TV would be closer. And then I'd close my eyes and open my eyes, and it would be closer. So it would just like move closer and closer and closer. Now, this is an experience that I had. It's very vivid in my memory. I've always told it the same way. Is it something that was a dream or misremembered? I don't know, but it's stuck there. And it was really, really weird. And it was enough to scare me, you know? So those types of things. So then it's like, well, when if you don't have,
Well, I
and I
have a
also,
similar story to that,
I
somewhat.
want to hear it.
But I want to jump back into where you're going with this. If I tell
Well,
mine, I'll try to keep it. When I was a kid, and because what cued me into thinking this and remembering this was how you're saying, like, I have this memory. What was it? I don't know, but it's there and it's vivid.
yeah.
When I was very young, I used to have this dream, and in my dream, everything was in as it was in reality. Like, it was the layout of my house was the same because our house had a long hallway, and at the end of the hallway was a door that went to the basement. You open the door
Okay.
to the basement, and the steps went straight down. And you'd get there at the bottom of the steps in the basement and turn around, and you'd have the whole basement lining the whole span of the house, right? So in my dream, I was I would walk down the steps, and I'd turn a corner, and I'd walk into the basement, and there would be a witch standing there.
Oh,
Classic witch with the hat. She had the weird long nose. She was pale. She had the garb. She just totally looked like
a
stereotypical
witch.
witch. And she would tell me, "Come to me, come here to me." And I would never go to her, but she would never advance towards me. She wanted me to come to her,
Yeah.
and I wouldn't do it. I would run or I'd wake up. I had this dream so much that I was teaching myself how to wake up. Instead of even just running away from her, I would wake up out of this dream because it freaked me out. I didn't know what a witch was yet.
I
I
was going to
found
ask
out
you. Yeah.
I found out what she was later. I was at a babysitter's house with a bunch of other kids my age. The babysitter was watching a movie that had a witch in it. I don't remember the movie, but I remember the witch pushed a baby carriage down a hill and was laughing. And I asked the babysitter, I'm like, what is she? Who is she? And I remember the babysitter being like, why are you asking me? That's a witch. And then I was like, oh, that's what I've been seeing in my dreams. So I had this dream about a witch before I knew what a witch was.
Yeah.
So what is that, right?
Exactly. I know. And that's the thing. And and then again, that's when you get into why, right? Like, well,
The why.
why? Why
Hmm.
do I need to know? Why is it still here? Was I just a child and not processing it, you know?
Yeah.
And then I felt like I could just, and then I'm like, okay, well, maybe it was trauma response because there was a lot of, you know, just there was a lot of arguing and stuff like that. Um, but there were other little things that it's really, really interesting to me because we grew up Catholic and my mom, would take us to church, but it was always rushed. And it was, maybe we got there for 15 minutes, and we were bad in church. And, it was just always that. And when my parents were divorcing, I remember, and I'm like 7, 8, 10, whatever, in that age range. Um, I remember sitting in church and the whole thing was always like, well, you pray to God and he'll help you and all that stuff. And I prayed that, my parents would stay together and it just got worse and worse and worse. And I remember sitting in church young and being like, you're not even here, are you? I mean, the disbelief and the unbelief seed was so young, was planted so young in my heart that it just grew. So I think when I think back about all these experiences, and I could sit here and,
Can you
I could,
can you clarify that? Do you mean like you didn't feel like God was there at all?
no, no, not at
Okay,
all.
I got you.
He didn't answer my prayers,
No,
obviously the way that,
I've been there. Okay, I'm
yeah,
with you. Hmm.
and then that turned into bitterness and anger and resentment and just, and that's the funny thing too, because it's like, I spent a lot of years mad at him. Not so much really unbelieving, but just being like, well, whatever, you don't care about me. So because it was like that broken father, you know what I mean? That was the
Yeah.
relationship that I projected onto him. And there was no one
Well,
around me
I
was
had that
ministering.
same thing for
Yeah.
me. I'm just going to sprinkle this in and let you keep going. But
Yeah.
like it was when that story I told about that thing jumping on me and walking out of my room, like when I was 13, I was going through this huge spiritual battle with my
Mhm.
friends from church because I went to church because my parents went, so they drug me along. So I had friends from church. Anytime anything religious would come up at like a get together or a sleepover or whatever, I'd always just tell them. And I was a really weird kid, so I'd just tell them I was a deist.
Okay.
That's how weird I am. It was, but
Nice.
my thinking
That's not
behind that
weird.
was that
Yeah.
I believed that there was a God, but I didn't believe. It's like your thing with church. I was like,
Yeah.
he's not here. He's out there somewhere worrying about
Right.
a planet or something. I don't know where God is, but he's not
Yeah.
here, and he's not actively involved with us as people. That was
Or
my
he's
thinking.
well, for me it was whatever you guys are doing here with all your, you know Catholicism, like, the Catholic Church, whatever they were doing, it wasn't really like I was looking at it like that entity, but it was just like, okay, I'm sitting here in church, we're doing all these things, and where is God? Because he's not in my situation and not answering me the way that I think that he should. Now, that's just bad theology, so that's going to hurt somebody, but it's
But that's
also
also a marker of the spiritual blanket
battle.
that's been thrown on us.
It's also, yes, it is. It totally is, but
Well,
it's
and I mean,
also,
like, we've been disconnected.
yeah, because there was nobody around. Nobody, I number one, I didn't share that. So I didn't feel comfortable enough to share that. I didn't feel comfortable enough to question. So that's a big thing. And I do love that about, and I'm going to keep harping on it because I love my church, but I love that our children's pastor says, you have questions, bring them. I want to hear your questions, because if they're not going to be safe enough to question in the church, they're going to go to the world and they're going to get all kinds of stupid answers, which is exactly what I did. So I don't blame anybody for that, but it's just part of my story that I was not comfortable enough to say, you know what? And it's probably because it was just a traumatic situation anyway. Like my family was completely broken apart, you know, so I
I
couldn't
think
really,
too that like some of the churches, not yours, and probably I know people listening have good
yeah,
churches and good pastors out there, but some of the churches have it's almost as if they've been infiltrated by the dark side
absolutely.
itself. And the
Absolutely.
people, kids involved in those churches are getting turned to the world or turned to the bad things in the world, I should say, at an
Yeah.
alarming rate because of something happening at the church.
Yeah. No,
Like there's like
I
an
mean, that's true.
opposite, there's like an inversion, right?
It's an opposite spirit.
That's what these bad spirits that we're constantly at war with are always doing. They're always inverting the situation. So
Yeah.
they love to go into a church where their leadership isn't strong enough to fight them off. They get in there, they get rooted in there, and then they go straight for the young minds and
Oh
they
yeah.
turn them onto the nastiest, gnarliest stuff they can. They, you know,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's coming
It's
from the
crazy.
church sometimes.
No, I think you're right. But it's also the culture too, right?
Yeah,
Like, so
absolutely.
it wasn't a church where when I grew up, there wasn't a church culture that was, you were safe to question. You didn't question. And I didn't feel safe in my own, if I questioned my mom about something, or it was always my grandmother's too. Cause you got to think about it. Like, I mean, I had grandmothers that were from the Depression. So it was like you did not. I had a grandmother who, if you did not eat your food, she would say, if you don't eat that food, the good Lord is going to punish you. That was the
Mhm.
theology that I was taught. So
But they're getting that
clearly,
from that. That's that depression, Great Depression
exactly.
mindset. They're
But
mixing it up with spirituality.
right.
Yeah,
But do you see what I'm saying?
I
So of
see.
course that if I don't eat this food and God is going to punish me, then clearly he's punishing me because look at my home life. So what did I do? So then there comes sin, there comes guilt, there comes all of that sort of stuff. And that took root in my mind like crazy. I got such a weird, it was just the the battlefield of my young mind. It was just constantly like, you are not enough, you are not enough, you are not. And that took seed so young, and that carried that language, and that exact thing carried all throughout all of the experiences I had in New Age, in the occult, in unbelief, whatever I was grasping for.
Hmm.
That wasn't enough. And then I wasn't enough, because I wasn't powerful enough. I couldn't find the right thing. Nothing got rid of it. And then
Did you
eventually,
find your way to the occult in a manner in which you started to
and
incorporate practices?
I want to, yeah, oh yeah, I want to be clear about that, because I feel like sometimes when I throw that around, people think, Aleister Crowley, like especially in this podcast. Like, so I want to be really clear. Like, I never was like involved in any sort of coven, because there honestly wasn't any around here. Like, I was definitely looking. Like when I was a teenager, if there would have been like a known coven, I totally would have signed up. But we just
Hmm.
didn't have that stuff. So it was like the New Age store, crystals, just a lot of that stuff. Now, I did get my hands on a lot of Wicca and like witchcraft books, where it's like you're a solitary practitioner. So I'm going to do some spell work, and I'm going to do some energy work, and I'm going to work with my candles. I'm going to I had an altar set up in my room all throughout high school. So I feel bad for whoever bought my mom's house, because I joke with my sister. I'm like, I should probably go knock on the door and be like, how you guys doing in here?
Yeah, yeah,
Any
yeah. Side
any
note, that's
any
what was
portals
happening.
happening? Like,
Side note, that I think that's why the house I was in, where I told the
yeah,
story, I think that it was haunted because when we moved into that house, I was 10 or 11, and I was upstairs I was trying to find my bedroom before my brother picked a room, right? So I was
yeah.
up there looking around, and I looked in the closet, and the previous owners and their two or three kids had left nothing. They had taken everything, but in the hallway closet, top shelf was a Ouija board. They left it.
God,
I
there you
found
go.
it. I find
Yeah,
the Ouija board. I take it to my mom, like, what is this? She gets rid of it because she knows. She got
yeah,
rid of it immediately. I don't even know. I don't even know I think she took it out to a dumpster somewhere off out of our neighborhood and far, far away. But
yeah,
I think that those kids were messing around with that Ouija board in my room. And so there was already a doorway to the other nether worlds of
yeah.
bad
Like
established
opened.
there. And
Yeah,
then I come along and I'm already the kind of person who's kind of in tune. Some people in Appalachia would say I'm a seer because of things that's happened to
yeah,
me and stuff. I don't claim that at all. I'm not telling people, oh, I'm a, empath seer. I don't ever say that,
yeah.
but I'm tuned to do that. But yeah, your house, where you set the altar up, you never know, that may have carried on to, late, like later
Well,
tenants.
well, and that was the same room that I had, you know, that the furniture moved in, but that I was young and I wasn't doing
Oh,
any
it
of that
moved on its
stuff.
own.
Now, see, this is the thing. I saw it like I didn't see
I
it
hear you.
move. I saw it gradually get closer and closer,
Yeah.
and then when when I woke up, you know, when I got up finally, it was back where it was. So it was just atmosphere was shifting enough to make things really weird for me, you know. And I
Yeah.
was sensitive to that.
Something
Um
was happening there. It was moving in your mind's eye, at least.
yeah. Yeah, and I don't try to like deconstruct it at all. I mean, my, you know, my there was a lot of stuff that was going on in that house, and it not all of it was supernatural. It was just a lot of angry energy that was happening there because of what was happening with my parents, my brother. Now, I don't really know if this is exactly the case, but I mean, he would wake up screaming a lot, and they thought it was just like, you know, growing pains. But now when I look back, I'm probably just thinking
Hmm.
maybe some sleep paralysis or something like that. You know, there was definitely something going on
It was
with my
happening in our
family.
house for sure. My
Yeah.
brother was he was younger than me, so he was having these super knockout, drag out, a war of a migraine problem.
Mm-hmm. Oh
And
yeah.
he would be in his room crying for mercy for hours because his migraines were so bad. And in hindsight, I didn't think about it at the time, but in hindsight, I'm wondering if it was just that house, or I should say
Could
the
be.
spirits that were involved with coming into that house.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it could be. And that's the thing, like, you know, we want to ask why. And I think sometimes it's important to ask that question. Like, why did this happen? What happened, to like kind of like map it out? Because I can see how and I had to start telling this, like my story on various different places so that I can better like talk to people when they come on my show. You know, I would
Yeah.
never expect somebody to like, you know, tell their whole life story, you know,
I think I
and
think
not
it's
want to share.
important.
Yeah.
I think it's important to tell this stuff and include the details and include stuff that you're ashamed of. I mean, because I think that's how people are going to really relate to your story. And the why, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about if this is the same for you, but for me, it's like I saw the reality that there is certainly a God through these
Yeah.
circumstances. I'm like, if that thing exists, that nasty thing that's not in this realm, that's from some other, that's a spirit, that's
Yeah.
from beyond the veil somewhere, if that exists, I know God exists.
Yeah. And that was interesting for me because at the same time that stuff, so, and that's like sprinkled through my memory. Like it's not something that happened consistently. These are just things that are like highlight reels, you know? But there was also one time, and I will never forget, it was in a different room, but it was my sister's room. And I was looking out the window and something, I know when I look back now that it was the Holy Spirit. And I don't know why this happened. I don't think it matters because it did. Something in my spirit, so it wasn't in my head. It wasn't you're not enough, you're not enough. It was like right here in my like little 7-year-old spirit said, there's no one. Oh geez. Sorry, I hit my mic. It
Wake
said,
up, everybody.
I wake up. It said, there's no one like you in the world. There is no other Christina in the world. Like you are made completely unique. And so I don't think that that means like I'm, you know, very special. It's just it was just that reassurance of you are God's child, you know. And it said it in a way that made it
Hmm.
clear to
Hmm.
me and I remembered it enough. And I will never forget that. It was just really so that was I think the first time I actually heard like the Holy Spirit, which is cool because that means that, you know, he was always there, you
Yeah.
know. And so I think that when you get back to that whole like that battle, if I think that there was this battle because for whatever reason of, you know, either the turmoil or just because we didn't have a lot of there wasn't a grounded faith that was instilled and maturing in me. I was definitely an open vessel because children are, you
Hmm.
know. And then that just took seed and then as I grew and was just looking, I looked for anything that was not Jesus, because he abandoned me. That's what I
Mhm.
thought. It was that father wound abandonment. Every time I look back and I try to like quantify and tell it, that's what makes sense to me, is that that's how I felt,
I think
you
God
know?
was there. That's a very important part of this whole thing. And I
Yeah.
think even in my situation, he was there too. I mean, I think that this spirit scared me to death, but I look
Mm-hmm.
back on it and there were sort of like these boundaries that this thing wouldn't cross with me. It never came into me, to my knowledge, even though
Yeah.
I hadn't like officially accepted Christ yet. This thing didn't come into me and possess me. It just scared me. It jumped on me and scared me. It took the wind out of my chest and my lungs and all that. Like I sat up like I couldn't breathe. But I do think that God was there and he pulled the plug and said, okay, that's enough. Leave the kid alone for the rest of the
Yeah.
night. And I think that time is different to these entities, because I think now I look back on that and the why, right? I've
Mm-hmm.
still to this day I question, why was this thing oppressing me like this? Like most kids don't go through that. Why me? Why did this thing oppress me so hard? And I think it has something to do with what I'm doing now or something I'm going to do later in life. Because I think time is so different to them. That oppression just hit me in my timeline as a young person, as a very
Yeah.
young kid. But to them, it had nothing maybe to do with me being a kid. It had something to do with why I'm here and what I'm supposed to do here. I don't know if that makes any sense at all,
No, it
but
does, because if you think about it, like let's think about it in terms of like, I mean, strategic sort of planning and, warfare or whatever. If you were going to go after somebody, you go after them before they could even get to a point where they realized what they were doing was an assignment, or, you would want to strike before any of that.
yeah.
So I think that's why children are definitely vulnerable. And it's funny because for me, it was actually my child. um like I tell him all the time, and I tell this part of my story is that God used my child to pull me back into him, to himself, because I was so, after I had him, I got really depressed. I had really bad anxiety. So depression and anxiety were always kind of, I mean, aside from being like a miserable goth kid,
You
like
know what? Isn't there, I've heard that there is some sort of I don't know if it's a condition or I don't know what it is because I'm not a doctor, but I've heard that women after they have their kids sometimes are more prone to fall into
yeah,
states of depression.
it's called postpartum depression. I mean,
Okay.
it's basically, and for me, personally, it happened after, I started weaning him. So you have this just full, all kinds of crazy hormones happening. And, if you're not really controlling them, or having any, I just felt like completely out of control. And I also kind of went through this whole battle of not knowing, again, not enough came in constantly. So there was definitely a really big battle of my mind. Now a lot of that was hormonal, but a lot of it was also, you have zero spiritual foundation whatsoever. I mean, we are spiritual beings. We cannot forget that. Like, you can't just like let go of your spirit, man.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well,
So
when did you find yourself kind of in the clear spiritually? Not that we ever are, but was there a moment for you where like, okay, everything's starting to make sense now?
So there was definitely, so I can tell you two moments that, as I've told this timeline, are really, I have to tell them at the same time, because
Sure.
after I had him, um we were going to, it was like a camping girls camp out, in the mountains. And it was like a spiritual retreat type thing. People were doing Reiki, energy healing, all this stuff, And so I went, and something had happened. I don't exactly remember what it was, but I was really, really ticked off at God. Like, so I still was just, I was really just not at all a believer and very angry with the Lord. And I was really into like a lot of like satanic black metal, like, I was writing for metal bands and stuff, and I was bartending. So I was really into that lifestyle. Um, and I had just started getting back into that. And I went on this retreat. So I tried the whole yoga, new age, I just tried everything and none of it worked. And I was getting really annoyed. Like I was just done because I was starting to see how all of that stuff wasn't working. And I was still searching and I was really just broken and empty. And something had happened and I was really mad at God. And I had a friend come in from out of town. She was a Christian woman, fantastic friend. And I knew she was a Christian and I just let her have it. And I was just like, this is why I don't like your God and I'm really mad. And, I was like drunk and I just let her have it. And she took it. She listened to me. Whatever. So at the same time, you gotta kind of, let's paint the picture here. I'm in the woods in a cabin with a bunch of, hippie girls doing all their yoga and doing all their whatever, like witchy full moon stuff. And there's a girl that's doing Reiki. She has no idea what she's doing. Before that, I used to go to this new age store and I actually went there and told them we were going to go do this. And I was like, shouldn't we be protecting ourselves? Like I kept saying that. It was really weird. And I kind of get like, I was getting on everyone's nerves because they were just like, oh my gosh, like shut up. No. And I'm thinking like witchy stuff. Like, shouldn't we be casting a salt circle? And, I'm thinking ritual, like we're all going to come together and do this stuff. So shouldn't we protect ourselves? And everyone was like, oh no, whatever. So that's happening in the house. I'm outside talking trash to my friend and about her God. And after all that, I go with another friend and we go down and we have a fire because I was just like, I got to get away from all these people. Like I'm just done. Like I knew that there was something going on. I could feel the energy. I could feel the atmosphere. I was like, I got to get out of this house. Like, I don't know what this girl's doing. She doesn't know what she's doing. Because at that time, I also was interested in becoming like an energy healer. So I was really sensitive to that stuff and to the changes in the atmosphere. And so I went down and started a fire and I was sitting with my friend and all of a sudden it just felt like we were being watched. And I felt like there was just stuff coming out of the woods at us. Like it was just like something. The only language I can use is that something had shifted and we were being it was like I felt like I had gotten something's attention. And my friend felt it too. And it was really weird. And we didn't know how to process it. And we started telling everybody about it. And they thought we were just crazy. And I'm like, dude, you guys are like getting some weirdo to like do Reiki on you. You know what I mean? Like, how are you calling me crazy? Like, I'm actually experiencing some sort of weird thing here. So I got like even more mad at that. And like by the time, so the way that it kind of happened was when we started leaving, we left and like a couple days later, and we started feeling better when we came down the mountain. And so as I've been processing this and telling the story, I actually had a friend on, I don't know if you know Drew from Cryptid Warfare.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When I told him on that show, he was just like, that sounds like a principality to me. And I was like,
Bingo.
Holy moly, I never even thought about that. So, I mean, that's when it really started that made sense to me.
Yeah, we're back at Ephesians 6.
Yep. I had gotten something's attention and I was an empty vessel. So at that point in my life, everything hit the fan. I got worse after that because I was just mad. And I was bartending again. It was all about, how cool can I be? Let me just be the cool bartender. I was drunk. It was so bad. My husband was going to leave me. Because I just could not do it. I did everything. I tried to be vegan. I tried to do it all on my own. Nothing worked because it doesn't work because it's just garbage, and I get really crass about that. And I feel bad because I know that comes off like to people. I don't want to be unsensitive to people that don't believe what I believe now, but I say that because I'm mad at myself. I get, that I'm mad at that girl because I know what she went through and, she's a totally different, like I'm totally different from her now.
Somebody
so part of
probably called something in that night, even if it wasn't intentional. You've got three young girls who are into they're
Oh
on the
no,
witchy side. And I
it
mean,
was
yeah, it's
20. It was a house full of people that were going there to get energy healing off of this
yeah.
girl who had no business doing whatever she was doing,
Yeah,
you know? Yeah.
that's like shooting up flares to the spiritual realm.
Oh,
Saying,
absolutely.
hey, come on over here. Look, we're down here. We're open for business. Come on
Look how
in.
mad I am at Jesus.
Yeah,
Hey.
it's like my buddy told me he went out with a girl one time and he said he's dropping her off at her place and she had a Ouija board welcome mat and I said, dude, there's your
I had
sign.
all those things. That was
I was like, don't even think about it, man, because that's if you're gonna put a Ouija board as your welcome act, that's the same as saying, come on in.
but that was me. I was that girl. Like
Hmm.
that was me. I welcomed all of it. I welcomed all the dark stuff, all of it, just whatever. I mean, there are so many times where I've gone places. That's why I felt bad talking to this poor girl, this paranormal investigator, because I did it the stupid way. I went out and I was like, you know, I'm here. I'll help you. I'll help you. I am an empath. I will help you, spirits of the Civil War. What an idiot, Oh my gosh. But so that was one pivotal moment. And thank God for Drew and thank God for podcasts like this because people can come on and suss it all out.
I think
For
Drew and I know Drew and I talk to Drew on a weekly basis sometimes.
Yeah.
He's a good guy and I think he was spot on with his
Yeah,
assessment.
no, and that was perfect. I needed to understand that. That was a piece of the
Mhm.
puzzle because then, that's when things really started ramping up. I had all this, I was done. I was done, and my husband was done. And I had a young baby. I had this great, great life. And it's just like, what is the matter with you? Why are you just in this darkness? So I finally just got to a point and I was in my mudroom, and this is just so vivid. It was like classic, like, it was raining. I was probably listening to like the Smiths or something, like some miserable music and drunk and just, staging my house and trying to, whatever, conjure my atmosphere and change the atmosphere of I used to say that all the time. So now I can
Yeah,
say it with like authority in Christ. But like when I was
yeah.
doing it on my own, it was just like, what are you doing?
It was like
Um,
a scene from The Craft.
Oh, I just talked about that. I spent all of high school like basically Fairuza Bullock in that movie. Like
Yeah.
and there was a real witch. And I wrote down when I had my little spell books, like I wrote down all those names of those. I mean, come on, gosh, what
Yeah,
an idiot.
I'm
Jeez
with you. I
Louise.
love that. I was a
I
weird kid.
loved
I'm
it.
telling you, I love that movie too.
I loved that
It wasn't
movie.
even for boys, and I loved it.
Do because it's just because it's the power, right? You
Yeah,
want that power. You want the
alluring.
power to shift everything and to shift atmospheres and all that stuff. And you're not going to get it unless you get it with the Holy Spirit. Like you're just not going to. You can't do anything without that
And
power.
it's and it embodies this teenage or young adult angst that
Yeah.
everybody goes through, where you got that point when you're in your teens or your early 20s when you think all the old people are dumb, they've got nothing
Yes.
left to say, and they don't get you, you don't get
Right.
them. But there's this idea that I can tap into something that they don't have any clue about.
And I can
There's this
bring all the
power available.
I can bring all the dead whales on the beach because Billy doesn't like me. Look what I did. That was me. I was totally that girl.
Yeah.
So I was like, I was in this crazy space and, in my mudroom and I was done. I was just done. It was raining. It was just one of those moments where it was just like I I got down on my knees and I broke down and I said, "You know what? I give up. I don't know what you are. I don't know if there's angels or whatever you are, if you're even there, but I cannot do this on my own anymore. And I'm done. So you win." Like it was just like a full surrender. And he had to do that because I was just such a little like obviously like the girl from the craft, like just an idiot brat. And I can't wait for one day that hopefully like I get to talk to him about it and we can laugh about it because I think that that's probably what the demons probably were just like, "Hey, look at her," but he was probably just like, "Oh, there she is. There's my
Yeah.
little goth daughter
Well, I
acting
think
like an idiot."
there's glory and there's something to be said about people who come to God through intense struggle.
Yeah.
And I can't speak for God, but I feel like it's sweeter that way because it's like that's why I think he gave us free will so that we could ultimately
Mm-hmm.
choose him. And when we have everything working against us not to choose him and we do it anyways,
Yeah.
that's a victory. That's a total victory in Christ, 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's really, it couldn't have happened, I don't think, any other way.
Yeah.
Like, it just, I mean, and that's just my story, and
Because
that's,
they wanted us, like my
mhm.
story being kind of interwoven
Yep.
in this episode
Yeah.
for some reason today. When you look at my story and you look at your story and that great story you just told, like they wanted us, the bad,
Yeah.
the bad spirit, the dark energy, whatever you want to call it, Satan, Lucifer, the dark side, they wanted us very bad, and they didn't. They lost. They
Yeah.
lost.
And so I don't want to say it's like been a battle of, see, and I don't even give credence to that. I get like a little bit, I don't want to say like prideful about it, but I try not to get into that like whole, a lot of people think there's a devil under every rock. And I went through that when I first, got baptized and, did all the things like, um, but that moment in that mudroom, that was my salvation moment. That's when I gave my heart to the Lord. It wasn't when I sat in church and put my hand up,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
all that. Um, and then he just fast tracked me. And then I didn't really know what to do. So I think that's when you kind of get into that religious spirit of judgment. And because then you want to do everything right. Because I didn't want to go back. And then I drove my husband even more crazy because he was just,
Well, I'll tell you this, and I had that same moment. And it wasn't
hmm
for church with me. It was outside of that house that I told you about where that experience happened. I was outside on our little deck. I had to get out of the house that it was just so negative in there. Like the temperature
yeah.
would drop in there and all the stuff, right? So it was just one of these evenings where I'm like, I gotta get out of the house. And I went through our sunroom and I don't know what a mud room is, but
It's like a sunroom. Yeah.
okay, I figured it
Yeah.
might be the same thing.
Yeah.
So I'm stepping out of my mud room, right? And and I said, all right, God,
hmm
um tomorrow when I go to school, because there was a Christian person in leadership at the school that I attended. I'm like, I'm going into that person's office and I'm going to surrender tomorrow.
hmm
But
Tomorrow.
it happened. It's almost like something happened.
Yeah.
I was just like, Lord, just get me through the night, get me to school tomorrow, and it's over. Like I'm going to accept Jesus, and this is going to be over. I hope. But I had something happen to me in that moment. It was like like it was almost like that was the moment that changed for me.
Because he knew your heart, right? Like he
Mhm.
knew, and he also knew that you were 13. So of course you're going to try to bargain. You don't probably didn't know what to do in that moment,
Well,
but
I was 15, but
okay. Yeah.
that same stuff was happening from
Yeah.
13 to 15. Like it just kept getting worse. So
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
took 2 years to break me down. That's how stubborn I was.
Oh, I mean, I had a whole lifetime. Like this all happened in 2019. Like it wasn't 20 years ago, it was
Yeah.
very, very recent. But I think that that's maybe, I mean, I'm not going to pretend to speak for the Lord, but knowing his character, it seems as though, he knew your heart. He knows your heart. And he knew that in that moment that's what you meant to
I
tell
wonder
him. But
if I wonder if that's the moment I became a Christian and I just solidified it the next day with the prayer. I don't know. But I'm always saying that based off what you're saying because I agree and I resonate with what you're saying about how in
yeah,
that moment when you make the personal decision when you're alone and it's just you and God, you're not in church with a bunch of people around. It's not the moment when you raise your hand in church. It's the moment before that when you make the decision. There's
it's
something powerful about that.
because it's the quiet place. It's where we're supposed to meet him.
Hmm.
It's where we're supposed to be with him. Like that's what it isn't supposed to be all about the creating the space and all that sort of stuff. Like it's in those quiet moments. And that's why I think it just made so much sense for me. Like
Yeah.
it was that moment that I can say, yeah, I made I made the choice. because
Mm.
I could have made it. I could have made another choice, you know, and it was really bad up until then. I mean, it was just really, I was so destructive. And, you know, I've had people ask me like, and I think this is why I don't want to be flippant about it because I feel like I don't know deliverance ministries are popping up all over the place and everybody wants to deliver you from something. And you know, I've had people ask me if I've ever had deliverance, and I've never gone to a deliverance service and had people like do all the stuff and, you know, pull stuff off me. But in that moment, that was deliverance. Like,
Yeah.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
like
Yeah.
that for sure, because things changed. They didn't change automatically, but they started to change, you know. And I've had people ask me, like, you know, do I think that I was possessed? No, I think I was definitely oppressed. And I think I probably picked up a lot of hitchhikers from whatever I've been doing my whole life, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
I believe, and I don't really until I don't know, this is just I believe this in my heart. Like when I was baptized and I came up out of that water, I mean, it was completely, I was a different person. So I believe in that. I believe in, you know, when you're water baptized, the old man is in the grave and you come up brand new. And
Mm-hmm.
so that for me, that was whatever it was. That's why I try not to, like, people ask me, people like to get into, and that's fine. Like, you know, what spirit was it? Was it Lilith? Was it whatever? I don't know what it was, you know, but it was enough to destroy my life.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so,
Well, who knows? I mean,
right.
yeah, there's a whole pantheon of those nasty spirits
Sure.
out there. It
Yeah.
could have been if they tell you who they are, even then you have to be skeptical
Yeah.
because they lie. These spirits lie. That's why
Right.
I always and like I said what I said earlier about the Ouija board lady with the welcome mat. And like I don't want to make anybody out there feel bad who any of my listeners who might mess with tarot or Ouija
No,
board.
I'm the same way. I'm the same
All are
way.
welcome here, but for
Yeah.
me, there I draw the line with Ouija boards. A lot of it has to do with that story I told you today.
Yeah.
I was at a party one time where they pulled one out, and said, "Shut the door. I'm going to leave." I'm like, "You do it on the other end of the house and keep the door shut, or I'm leaving."
I literally just had the same conversation with this girl Shell from Shell's Spooky Stories like earlier today. It was the same
Really?
exact thing. She was like, somebody, my mom told me about Ouija boards because she had an experience, and I was in a situation where people were doing it, and I went into a different room and I said,
Yeah.
"You guys can do it." But
Hmm.
you know, I think, and that's like, so for me, I feel the same way. Like and I think it's just really maturity, and it's now maturity, kind of understanding God's character a little bit better, and having those secret place moments, you know, and understanding who I am in Christ, that, you know, I get it. The reason that I kind of sound so harsh about Ouija boards and tarot cards, I'm not coming at you because it's religious and it's wrong and Jesus told me not to. I'm coming at you to tell you not to do that because you have no idea the repercussions of what you're playing with. And that gets back all the way back to the beginning of our conversation of people just do not realize that we live in a very, very supernatural and spiritual world. And if we're just going to keep walking around blindly and not realize that, then we're just going to continue to be in trouble and we're never, ever going to walk in purpose, you know?
Yeah, and this is a spiritual world, and the
Yeah.
elites have a very anti-God version of the occult that clashes with this type of Christianity that we're talking about
Hmm.
today that we've experienced. I
Yeah.
mean, so the more I can highlight that divide and not be, I'm not trying to preach to people, but I do believe that that divide needs to be highlighted because my sometimes esoteric Christian beliefs are not the same as the elites'
Yeah.
weird occult beliefs. But I think
Oh,
that people
yeah.
are waking up to the fact that the world elites have these culty, transhuman, eugenicist, slave planet, ancient, weird bloodline beliefs. And if we could figure out what those are, because that's seeped into our culture. That's part of
It
the
really
story we're
is.
telling today. A lot of the oppression that we went through, it's raining down from
Hmm.
this culture that these elites have crafted, in my opinion. But if we can figure out, this is one of the reasons I look into the occult like I do. If we could figure out exactly what these people believe, I
Yeah.
think we might have a chance where humanity can rise again and Christians can lead that charge in the battle. And it'll be doing everybody a favor.
Well, I no, I agree. And I had a note about one of your past. I just really enjoy all the guests that you've had on because you really
Thanks.
deep, you dive deep into things that like I just, I don't. But I will happily come back on and talk about the stuff. And I would
Of
love for you to
course.
come. Well, aren't you coming? You're coming on my show, right? Yeah,
Sure.
at some
Yeah.
point. I think we had, I don't know, maybe. I
Yeah,
don't know
no,
if we
I'm
actually
coming.
scheduled
Well,
something. Yeah.
I told you I would, so yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I love that. Like I don't know. I don't ever want this podcast to just be like, okay, everyone come over my house and hang out. Like I want to hang out on other people's podcasts like all the time. I think that makes it so much it's dumb not to because it's like cross marketing. Like why wouldn't you just want to like talk to other people
Yeah,
and their
yeah.
audience, Because you're not like I'm not just talking to you, I'm talking to your audience, you know what I mean?
hmm
But I had
you when you said that you weren't trying to be harsh earlier about the Ouija board and all that, I haven't got that from you this conversation. I appreciate that. I want to
yeah,
say that like you haven't been because I've been coming in contact with Christians in this space that they make me feel like I'm not Christian enough for them.
yeah.
And you haven't done that at all today. So I appreciate that. You
Oh
haven't been
yeah.
harsh at all. You've been very reasonable about the things, you know.
Yeah. No, I'm
It,
harsh on myself. And I think, but I think for, if somebody is a non-believer, I never want to, have someone's vision of God's character to be corrupted because of the way that I'm presenting him. You know what I mean? So I don't want to come off as like some other like religious Christian that's telling you not to do tarot cards. It's not because, like I said, it's the Bible said not to. It's because it's just not the best.
when you
It's just not.
when you also when you said it's not black or white earlier in the
Mhm.
context of what we were talking about, I thought that that was perfect because it's like you've been very reasonable, even to the fact where we talked about Powwow and Long Lost Friend, and you did not demonize that book. Most people, a lot of Christians would, and you didn't.
Well,
So I
I'm telling you,
appreciate that
this was so eye-opening because,
because
like I said,
there's something going on with that book that's
yeah.
more than just good and bad.
Well, and it's just like I said, I think that really this is another testament of God's character where he will just kind of, the Holy Spirit will be like, you know what? Nope, not right now. This is not the time to have this conversation. And you are probably such a little baby in your faith that you can't even understand that. So I'm just going to make you feel
Mm.
gross, which is what he does.
Yeah, yeah.
And Crystal and I both were just like, ew, like we listened to it and we were just like, oh, we sound like I don't like this. Like ew, wait, I don't even want to talk about this guy. So we both kind of
Mm.
had that discernment of like, we're not even going to put this out there.
Mm.
Um, and I never understood it until now. And I've never talked about that book since. I've never looked at it since. But when I looked
That's
through it,
crazy.
it's
I had a
insane, dude.
I
We
had a
have to have this
very
conversation.
I had a
I think we're gonna
very
have to go and to have this conversation
okay, yeah, yeah, we'll talk about it
later,
later.
not
Yeah,
now. Like
later. Yeah, yeah.
I have to revisit it totally.
No, I'm down with that because I had a very weird like stream of thoughts about that book because I bought
Mm,
it for research and I I had it over here on the shelf for many episodes and like sometimes something would happen on an episode and I think about it I'm like I'm not going to talk about that. I'm not going to go there because
yeah,
I don't know people aren't going to understand. People are going to think that like they might think I'm an occultist or a
it's a
practicing
really
occultist or something.
it is a really strange book. Some of the remedies are involving, I don't like literally the eye of a black and white cat. I mean,
Yeah.
that was
Oh
the
yeah.
stuff that like stood out to me where I was like,
hmm
is this really how we're dealing with our community issues? Is
hmm
just cat eyeballs. Okay.
But you know what? For me, what made it, I guess, less taboo for me, and
Hmm.
I'll say this right now, I don't practice any of the stuff in that book,
Right.
but I grew up for a big chunk of my younger years in Appalachia, and I knew
Hmm.
diehard Christian ladies, older Christian ladies who did everything like they walked so tightly with the Lord. It was almost untouched, almost like unattainable. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they had these weird Pennsylvania Dutch like magic beliefs as well.
Remedies and stuff. And
Remedies,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, and like they believed in curses. They believed you could do things to keep curses from binding to you. They believed you could do things to keep like the fairies out and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like light magic
Yeah.
that
And so
that, but they were Christians too. So it's
and I
like,
think that that's what makes me or made me because I haven't looked at it again. But I think that's what made me really uncomfortable about it because I was practicing light
yeah, I
magic
get that.
for
Okay.
a while,
Hmm.
before things got even worse. So it's just kind of like I don't even want to touch,
Yeah,
but
no, I
then
get that.
again, am I believing do I really honestly believe that the spirit who lives in me is greater than the spirit of the world? So I have to remind myself of that all the time because that religious spirit will keep coming back at me. I know, you
Yeah,
know,
I like that too. I mean,
you know,
one of the things that I find so interesting about the old forgotten Christian mystics is that they seem
mm,
to be armed with the knowledge of the mysteries and they had Christ in their heart.
yeah, yeah. It's fascinating. It
And they
really,
were
really
able
is.
to almost like push back the forces of evil in this like Gandalf Lord of the Rings kind of way. And
Oh,
it almost like made sense for that era that they were in, you
you know what's
know?
funny? That's what I thought we were going to talk about. The whole, I was like, I have, again,
You
I told you,
did?
I was, well, no, because I had this whole, I was like, I have this whole notebook with all my little notes. And I was going to talk about how I feel like because I loved your one episode. I think, I can't remember what it was, but it was about like the woods, like the spirit of the
Oh, we
woods
could
and the
do that
forest
episode some other time. I'd
at
love
some
to.
point. But like, that's what I really thought. But it's different when you don't like really know. And, when you're first meeting
Mm.
somebody. And I thought, like, oh yeah, we'll talk about how I feel like we're so far from the garden and like the spirits of the woods. And because I had a really good encounter with the Lord in the woods. And so I always kind of think like Narnia and like, I don't know,
Yeah.
like Lord of the Rings is exactly how like it used to be. Like, I mean, obviously after the fall, but like in those times of like before we didn't like superstition, there was this kind of magical, I'm going to say it like Christianity. It was just this kind of not magic, like, you know what I'm saying? I
Oh,
don't have to
yeah,
quantify,
there were
but that's just what it
Christian
was.
esoterists.
Exactly. And it's funny because, like, so now there are
There was,
some
and there's
things,
good and bad too. There's like
right?
you can look back on some of these guys' lives and see where they kind of took the wrong turn as well, because you've got John Dee. And what's
Oh,
interesting
yeah.
about John Dee is that I think he took a wrong turn, obviously, but he got too in deep with magic. But like Oxford cites the British Empire as starting around 1583, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And guess who was in the service of the Queen
Yeah.
who helped start the British Empire in 1583? John Dee. There's a
So
magician behind it.
I never knew any of that, and I loved when I was girl, like it seriously loved Queen Elizabeth the First. She was like
Yeah.
an idol to me. And
That was
years
like her
ago,
secret.
I know I never knew that until like you guys literally said it on your show, and I was like,
Oh,
oh my
really?
gosh, John D, because it was Heidi Love, and I have
Oh,
got to
yeah.
talk to her. She's amazing. But
I'll
I was
set you
like,
up.
oh my gosh, John D.
Hmm.
He was a magician. Like it's crazy. So
Yeah,
I
my point is that, this was such a thing in the old world that there were literally magicians behind building empires, backing
yeah,
that, and
it's
it's
crazy.
just been hidden from the public knowledge.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah, we could do a deep dive on that more folky
I really
uh
want to.
elementals in the land kind of a thing, right?
I would love to because like so this is just one sort of like little kind of appetizer of that, right? Like so for me in my own personal faith, I used to sage everything, right? Like that was how I protected everything, which is cute because the spirit behind it was for me at least in the supernatural was just like get away, flipendo, like I'm doing this and I had no authority. Um, so now, and I like burning incense and all that stuff. So when I kind of got after I started walking with the Lord, I was like, okay, well, I don't know what to do now. I took every little thing to Him and the Holy Spirit, and the sage is the main thing that like the Holy Spirit was just like, you can't burn that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me a while to realize why, because I can burn incense, no problem.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing, nothing in my spirit. I'm very, very sensitive to when the Holy Spirit is like, no. Sage.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm sorry I keep butting in with personal experiences on this episode, but it's because often throughout this conversation, I've had the exact same thing happen to me, and I've had that happen when I felt it happened a while ago, maybe a year ago or two, and I just felt like I'm not supposed to be using this sage, so I switched over to something else, and so far that's okay. There's a
What
and
is
I
it?
Palo
Palo Santo.
Santo.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I mean, I know people are going to have mixed feelings on that. But when I used it, like I just use it to have some smoke and I pray. I pray.
Well, Palo Santo.
I don't put the power in the Palo Santo. I put the power in the prayer that I'm using.
So the Palo Santo too is like really good, I think, like antimicrobial. So if you want to
Mhm.
get like nerdy and herby, like
Yeah.
I can totally do that. But
Yeah. Yeah.
like I want to kind of I want to explain exactly what happened was because, and it speaks to your experience, is that it was because, and because I kind of brought it to him and I was just like, I don't understand why I feel okay doing this stuff. Like I'm getting permission and it's okay to do this. It's okay to take like holy basil. Like if you ever have a bee sting, it's a plant called holy basil. You
Yeah.
just like
Mhm.
chew it up and you put it right on there. It takes the sting away. Like you can
Mhm.
use the things, the herbs and everything in nature that God gave us. But I couldn't understand why the sage made me feel so sick. And it finally became clear because I had made an idol out of it.
Mhm.
I was using the sage, just like you said, you made an idol out of it. It wasn't the power of the Holy Spirit. And this is just something that I'm doing in the natural to represent the supernatural or, whatever. The reason that we do things, cleansing the air, it does actually. Like sage is actually, it cleans the atmosphere of your house because it cleans out the air and the toxins. It doesn't necessarily have to be, now it's used obviously ceremonially, and Native Americans can do that, but I couldn't do it. I had to understand why I wasn't allowed to do it, why it made me feel sick. And the Holy Spirit made it clear because you had made an idol out of it. You were never going to Jesus. You were going to this and you gave this more power and it was dark.
Mhm. Yeah,
So,
and there's something to that. Like, there's something to idols as well. I mean, as far back as the Old Testament, it's very clear in the Old Testament that God doesn't want His people messing with idols. Doesn't
yeah.
want them in their possession. Doesn't want them The Israelites weren't allowed to take the idols from the groups of people that they would conquer in battle and all kinds of stuff. It was like
Yeah,
that's a no-no. But it's
exactly.
symbolically a
Yeah.
no-no.
Yeah, exactly. And that's just what I had done. And it's so funny because like right before it was like we were just gonna get like a really bad snowstorm here in Maryland. And it was a Sunday and I was like I was at church and I was like backstage with my pastor and he was joking. He's like, all right. And he said this in front of people because this is just kind of how he is. It's funny. He's like, all right, hey Christina, it's gonna snow here. You got any witchcraft to make it stop snowing? Like he just jokes about it all the time. And he knows he can do it with me because it's like I'm okay with it. But it just speaks to the fact that like the maturity that he has in his walk and his calling as a pastor to know that I'm not some voodoo, you know what I mean? Like it just
Yeah.
shows that he's walking in spiritual maturity and with the Holy Spirit. And
Hmm.
that's what leads the church and not that. So I love that. And I kind of endure it. And I should probably start telling him all this stuff because I just go on podcasts and tell it, like give honor to him. But I should probably start telling him, like, it actually, you might not realize this, but it's actually kind of really cool that you do that because it shows that you're not, you know,
I
you
think that the
believe.
pastors should be not specifically your pastor, but I
Yeah.
think just pastors in general should be listening to shows like ours.
Yeah.
I think that they would get something out of it. I really
I think
do.
I think you're gonna start seeing it. I mean, like Blurry Creatures was just on what is it, Duck Call. So like the Robinsons, Duck Dynasty
Oh,
family.
Doug Dynasty. Okay,
Yeah.
interesting. Interesting
That's
team up.
it was an amazing episode. Like I
Really, are
loved
those
it. I
guys
like
Christians? Those Duck
they
Dynasty guys?
are.
Okay.
And they are like, that's a big different chunk of Christians And it was really,
Oh
really,
yeah.
it was so funny because what happened when that I loved that episode because of exactly what happened. And it kind of gets to this whole thing that I love about the space is you've got the weirdos coming in with like another set of weirdos because the Robinsons are kind of weird too. And they're very polarized Christian family, like they've been through the media and all that sort of stuff. But the cool thing was they're sitting there and they're talking about aliens. And Uncle Si is like, oh, yeah, I saw an alien when I was catfishing or whatever, And I don't know, I don't really follow the show, but like his grandson was like, we've been doing this podcast for like 4 years and you've never brought it up. And he's like, yeah, why would I bring it up? But the cool thing was, he had such great faith that he just came right back and was just like, yeah, but whatever he said, it was some sort of like,
I wonder what they think about
shake
Bigfoot.
my faith. Well, they talk about it. You guys, everybody listening should go watch this episode. It's amazing.
Check it out. I'll check it out. Speaking of that show, Blurry Creatures, like and let me say this too. I appreciate that you have been so pro church today because it helps balance me out. It's not that I'm against churches. I'm not against churches. I see a lot of flaws in organized religion. But
oh, sure.
But what I do think, what I'd like to see more with churches in general would be an exploration of Genesis 6 and a lot of the stuff that they cover on that show. Because I've heard a couple episodes of theirs and the stuff they do on Genesis 6 and Genesis 3:15 and so on from there. I'm pretty much down with all that. I think I believe that.
Well, that conversation is being had publicly, so it's going to trickle down into question. I mean, we don't really talk about it at my church, but I know that the people in small groups are talking about it. People are talking about it because we had a congressman talk about Nephilim on, in public office,
Yeah, I think even Tucker Carlson said it one
Tucker
day.
Carlson, so come on, like people are asking the questions. So I think that is gonna start catching up. And there's another thing that I was thinking about that is really kind of cool. So they just had L.A. Marzulli back on, and I really enjoy and respect his work. Just kind of in the whole like UFO space, but he has a really interesting theory of it's kind of like the whole coming great deception, and I think there's some credence to that. And if you follow that logic of like there's going to be this great alien deception that's going to try to take us further and further away from Christ, you follow that, I think what's going to happen is you're going to see a lot of kind of cults coming up, like starseed cults, things like I think we're going to see a revival of that. So that's why it's also really important for the church to come to and churches and pastors to start, like you kind of have to take that spiritual temperature because you have to be prepared.
I couldn't agree with that more. I think that's
you've got to be prepared.
That's what's going to happen with this whole disclosure thing. You're going to start see these exactly what you said. These starseed alien, star people cults, because that's what back to what we said earlier in the show. That's what happened in 1947. A lot of people don't realize this because they think that when they think of 47, they think Roswell and Kenneth Arnold, and that's true. Happening alongside of that in the shadows was this whole UFO religion that popped up, being ran by people like George Van Tassel out in the Mojave Desert. And it was a whole spiritualist movement that was to do with the aliens and the UFOs and the Ashtar Command and all of that. And it's crazy because it's not a coincidence, because the same time that George Van Tassel moved out to the Mojave Desert to start this UFO religion, it was the same time that Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard were out there in the same desert
opening portals,
doing the Babylon working. So it's like that's not a coincidence, and he didn't know them.
Yeah,
I mean, I didn't know them.
I just heard you like cover that, and it's all of these connections that I think again
that's going to happen again right now with this disclosure thing, something like that.
Exactly. And I think that LA communicates it on a level that is very urgent, and I think that that is very important. But I think sometimes people just, it gets lost in the translation of it. Like, you don't understand what that means. If you, again, if you follow it to its logical conclusion, if you follow Revelation is unfolding to its logical conclusion, what's going to happen? We're going to see a lot more cryptids. We're going to see a lot more cults. We're going to see a lot more people searching for answers. And we need to be the body of Christ to provide the answers and welcome the weirdos. Like, yes, we know. We know you saw an alien. We know you were abducted. This is really crazy. I know you saw Bigfoot. Come over here. Let me minister to you. Like,
Well,
we need
yeah,
to be
and
that part of the body.
right now it's podcasts that are leading that charge.
Absolutely. Yep.
And I mean,
Yeah.
hopefully, like this is just what I was saying earlier with the churches and all. It's not that I don't like churches, that they're not there yet as a
Yeah.
whole. Hopefully, because it's the podcasters are the ones talking about this stuff. We're the ones giving people an outlet to explore these more taboo subjects that aren't as taboo anymore, because everything's changing. Even the government is talking about Nephilim, like you said,
Yeah.
and disclosure. So it's time for the conversation to be had. And I'm so happy I got in podcasting when I did, because this is the place where it's being had. That discussion is being had. This is the forum. This is the new age of outlaw radio.
I love that. Yeah. It's awesome. Like, it really is. This is just exactly where those conversations are going to be had. And if, I don't know if we need to like wrap up, or
We
I
can
should
we can
probably,
go ahead and
yeah.
start winding down. We're almost at
But
2 hours, so this was
But
great.
one thing that I really do want to say, and this is something that, is on my heart for my fellow content creators in this space, is, I mean, number one, anyone listening, or you're either creating content or consuming it, right? So always be guarding your heart with the stuff that you're consuming. If it becomes too much, there's been plenty of times where I've started listening to people and I've gone down rabbit trails and I've just been like, oh my gosh, this is ruining my soul, and it's ruining, like, I can't let this in. So always be wary of that. But also, if again we follow this to a logical conclusion, right? So we're this like last, this final frontier or whatever. We're in the beginning of all this stuff. Guys, please, as you're titling and descripting things, like, use the algorithm against itself. Like, really be paying attention to like how you title and describe things, because it's going to help get all of this stuff out. So for me, that's why I did like Sasquatch, sourdough, like think of keywords and things like that to kind of, I always feel bad because I know that some people just aren't thinking about things in production terms. And like, you might not be a YouTuber, because there's some people that I'm just like, oh man.
I know that I'm not the best at that. Like, I've tried to learn that this whole trade of doing that. And I think maybe it comes more natural to you, because you said something earlier in the show that I thought was interesting. I meant to ask you about it, but this has been so good I didn't want to go back to it. But you said something about writing for metal bands. So it seems like you've been in some sort of a production like gig, right?
Yeah, I used to work for we had like a city paper, and I just did like a lot of freelance. I always wanted to write. So writing is just like part of, like, I do a lot of journaling and stuff like that. But I actually went to school for like poetry and creative writing. So I and like, took media classes. I kind of, when I tell the story about this actual podcast, it's so funny how God will just take the things that he's already put in you, like, and then he'll just like refine it. Like, he's refined so much of the things that I've loved. I wanted to have like a, when I was like really into like the goth scene, I wanted to have like a goth metal magazine. And so this is the kind of this, like, and with the website and stuff like that,
you can
like,
channel that into your new thing, right?
It's really really
vibe.
cool. Yeah,
I like that. I've always thought it'd be cool to do like a magazine or a zine. You remember zines?
Yes.
Yeah. I thought that would be cool. That kind of stuff actually works really good in these for these topics like 14 like stuff.
I got one issue of that, the like 40 in times, and I was just like, God, this stuff is really weird.
That stuff's right down my alley too. It really is.
Some of it I was just like, oh man.
I could do, and I don't do this because I think I'm trying to be more broad with what I'm doing with this show, but I could totally do a straight up 4TN show where I just talk about weirdo UFO stuff all day. I could do that, but I just don't.
I want to do an episode where it's, because I have this whole thing where, because I've rewatched the X-Files like 100 times. Like, I grew up on the X-Files.
Me too.
And I mean, I have, it's, you can't see it. My husband was joking about this earlier, but I have, for my 30th birthday a long time ago, he got me a signed David Duchovny
Nice.
picture. So it's like
Yeah.
right up here next to my
Hmm.
signed blurry creatures. Yeah, I'm such a
I see the
fangirl.
blurry.
I'm
That
actually wearing,
that show was there for me too. You know, my dad used
oh
to
my
watch that
gosh.
show, and I would
Yeah.
watch it with him. I don't know how that happened. He just let me watch it, but it was always not, it was always night outside when that show was on. So it was always extra like
It
heightened.
came on at like
My
10.
senses were always
Yeah.
like, and I'd watch it with him, and then I'd go to bed, and like sometimes I wouldn't be able to sleep because I was so freaked out. But I didn't
Yeah.
tell my parents because I'm like, well, then
Mhm.
they're not gonna let me watch the
They're
X
not gonna
Files
let me watch it.
anymore.
Well, the thing is, so what I want to do is I want to do like a show where I just want to break down because when I watch the X-Files now, I'm like, oh, well, okay, wait, that happened, that's happening, that happened, that happened. Like it's like Simpsons did it, like X-Files did it.
Mm,
Like I'm just like, this is totally like we're living in the X-Files right now. It's insane to
yeah.
me.
Yeah.
It's
I
just
mean,
crazy.
yeah,
Like,
I'm supposed to do a CERN show with somebody soon, and I was just thinking that
oh,
same thing.
cool.
It's like because
Yeah.
what I was thinking about was that Ghostbusters scene from the 80s or yeah, late 80s
Yes.
Ghostbusters where like the they've got their headquarters in New York and something happens like the ghost box explodes or something and it blows a hole through the roof and all these spirits shoot up into the New York sky.
Yeah, because the EPA shut down the whole like receptacle. That's what it was. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
But
they shut it down.
I see I could see a similar situation, as cheesy as this may sound, happening with CERN one day.
Dude, the Ghostbusters is like it's so funny because when I try to explain like spiritual warfare to people that aren't like Christian or in church or whatever experience it, I'm like, dude, Ghostbusters, that's spiritual warfare. Like that's
Go-
exactly what's happening.
Ghostbusters was
Like
a documentary.
it's legit. That's why, like, so Fellowship of the Fringe. When I sound designed my intro, it was just all spliced parts of like Ghostbusters talking about the Bible. Because I'm just like, this is what
Hmm.
we're watching right now. Like this, they think about it. They had to come together to battle this like old when they were doing the research for the old deity and trying, and then it wasn't the internet, like whatever. I can't remember what it was, but like they did they did the research, they figured out what the principality was, and then they came together to bring it down. Like that's
Yeah.
spiritual warfare.
That's exactly what it, and I mean, yeah, and those
Ghostbusters.
entities are those are the Liliths and such,
Right.
etc. that we're dealing with today are these old ancient deities, in my
A
opinion. So,
gnat, like whatever it is, yeah, like
mhm.
just recycled, whatever. So I mean,
Yeah,
again, I don't want to be
that
like
movie was so good. But it was so,
it's
but that's what's
it's exactly
happening.
what is happening right now. Every
It's
time I watch Ghostbusters, I'm like, guys, you don't understand this. This is really happening.
and
This
then
is what the
and it
spirit. This is what the spiritual
possesses
looks like.
the
Right.
people, and then it come there's like a chimera running down the street like some big like half lion
Yes.
half dog thing. It's like this is what
Oh my
happened back in the
gosh.
days of Noah that might happen again very soon.
It was okay. You heard it here first. I do this all the
Yeah,
time on my show. You heard it here first. Ghostbusters was predictive programming. So
bam,
welcome,
that's it.
welcome,
Yeah,
guys.
this was great. I know we could keep going, but
I know.
we'll
Seriously, I
wrap it
know.
up.
Yeah.
um Tell everyone where they can find you.
Please go to sasquatchandsourdough.com because my husband worked really hard on we didn't even talk about the encounter map. Whatever kind of
Oh
encounter
yeah.
you've got going on, you can send it in. You can also put in prayer requests. You can send emails. Like you can, and I'm also on Instagram too. So you can just follow us on Instagram and YouTube. But I do most of the communication through Instagram, but I'm trying to get it switched through the website. So the encounter map is basically just like I created this space so that we can get a better bird's eye view of all kinds of different encounters, not just Dogman, not just Bigfoot, not just aliens or whatever. Like whatever you're experiencing, put it in there and we'll find a place for it. Because as it gets weirder and weirder, I think it's going to be, I don't know, God just kind of put this on my heart that we need to start looking at the stuff
It's cool.
from
It's well done.
here.
I think, you've got it set up in a way where it's enjoyable to go check it out as well.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, it's
like
kind of it's
it's fun.
kitschy and cute
Hmm.
and cutesy, but at some point, I don't know. And no one seems to be going to it, so it's
Well,
just me. It's me adding stuff, and
it'll take time, but
yeah.
Once it, yeah, well, this is what we'll do. We got to put the word out and
Yeah.
maybe remind me, and I'll leave a link to it in the description so people can actually. I
put a
link just for
description.
that site. Just
just
remind me.
Sasquatch and sourdough.com.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so just go to the website, but I'll try to. Yeah, I'll remember that. I'll link it so everybody check that out. It's cool. I liked it. So
cool. Thanks.
I might
Thanks
need
for
to
going there.
I might need to add an encounter to it for you.
Sometimes I'm such a nerd. Sometimes I go on and I look at the Google Analytics and I tell my husband, I'm like, look, there's one more person on there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's me. Like I can see myself live. And I'm like, it's just kidding. It's me. So
well, that kind of stuff takes time. Just stick with it. I mean,
it totally does.
Even like New Fork. I tell people about New Fork and they've never heard about it.
I've never heard of that. What's that?
New Fork?
Yeah.
It's what does it stand for? Something UFO network. It's like a MUFON but different. It's same concept as MUFON.
Oh, okay. It's New Fork. Oh, is it
New Fork?
It's probably the one that I go to. And
it's
New Fron. Is it like new? Is it like the?
No, it's New Fork. NUFORC. It's
Oh, okay.
Hold on, let me see. New Fork National UFO Reporting Center.
Yeah, I go there. I link. They're constantly linked in every show note description that we have because I either use them as a source, and that's where I pull when I have to do research on areas. That's where I go to get my stuff. I don't go to MUFON.
Yeah. Okay. Right on.
I traditionally have never really gone there. So
yeah. Well, it's cool. Like we'll have to get your site up there on a level of eyes like that. That way people can go there because these sites are great because you can go see what's happening or what has happened recently in your area. So people who don't would have no inkling. They would have no idea that there's UFO stuff happening in their area. They would be very surprised because it's happening everywhere, but we'll wrap it up with that. This has been great. Yeah,
definitely.
Thanks for coming.
You'll have to come on, and do, I don't know. We'll get another guest so we can do, Fellowship of the Fringe is like my new favorite thing that I'm doing. Just getting a whole bunch of podcasters together and just talking about the stuff that we're noticing in our communities and, in our actual audience communities and stuff.
All right, cool. We'll talk about it afterwards.
Yeah, totally.
As always, break the mold, conquer the realm, and thanks for listening.